Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to my channel. My name is Paul, the Canadian Snowman, here once again with Tecumseh. This is the War of 1812. We've come to the big war. I guess we're going to kind of see how the natives, Tecumseh, kind of how they played their role in it. It's been a while since I've obviously learned about this war, but I do know this war. Actually, I do know it, but I'm not going into this blind at all. I know how this kind of how this war goes. So, but I don't really. I know the natives have played a big part in this war, but I really don't know the details or anything like that, or like Tecumseh or anything. What he did or anything really like that, or at least I just don't remember. So yeah, we're gonna jump right into this. Just a heads up, there might not be any videos tomorrow. Just a heads up, and yeah, we're going to jump right into this, guys. War of 1812. Woo! Not many people know about this war. I think the Canadians are the ones that probably know about it most. I'm not sure how this war is kind of taught in, many as British history. So I'm kind of curious if any of you are here or watching this. Do they teach how much of this war do they teach you in school, if any? Because it's not really a big war, especially in terms of like British history and all. And I know for as far as as a Canadian who lives in the States, I know not many Americans really know of this war. They really don't. At least where I'm living at. So it's definitely I think it's definitely underappreciated, I think. Anyways, I guess there's not a whole lot of death when you compare it to a lot of other wars, but I definitely think it plays a big role in history because how if the outcome was different, it definitely would have changed history big time. But anyways, guys, we're gonna jump into this. Please hit that like and subscribe button below. I'd really appreciate it. And yeah, let's jump all into it. Dun, dun, dun. 3, 2, 1, bam.
The Battle of Tippecanoe was a
Oh yeah, and if you're a new subscriber here, this is the third part in a three-part series. We kind of get to see how Tecumseh became, how he kind of basically grew up, basically who he is, and we got to see the first battle pretty much last episode, and it was definitely very interesting. And I don't want to, I guess, say the outcome because, but I'm sure you guys probably already know anyway. But anyways, if you want to restart this series, only a three-part series, and definitely do that. And if you're also new, I do a lot of playlists when it comes to war and stuff like that. So definitely check out the playlist, and I do a lot of Geography Now videos. So yeah, there's that. Anyways, let's get back to it.
The Battle of Tippecanoe was a major setback for Tecumseh, but warriors across the American frontier still answered his call. Less than a year later, the Shawnee chieftain cast himself into the War of 1812, fighting alongside the British to forge an independent homeland for his people in the crucible of war. A massive thank you to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this video. ExpressVPN is the easiest and fastest VPN provider, which gives its users in the past, but have found Express to be the most reliable and the most user-feedback guarantee. Visit expressvpn.com/kingsandgenerals to learn more. On June 17, 1812, the United States Senate voted narrowly in favor of armed conflict with Great Britain. This war had been a long time coming. As a certain Napoleon Bonaparte had been conquering across Europe, the British had imposed themselves upon US sovereignty, embargoing American trade with France and her allies, while kidnapping sailors off American ships to...
I forgot that's another reason why not many people, I guess, know about this war, because the whole Napoleonic Wars were kind of going around at the same time. So obviously, a lot more death, a lot more going on over there in Europe than back, Canada, US, so there's definitely that.
with France and her allies, while kidnapping sailors off American ships to supplement the Royal Navy's perpetual need for manpower. But these were not the real causes of the war. For decades, the British Empire had been empowering native...
That does suck though, man, that, they're doing trade, but and the sailors were getting kidnapped, to kind of be used. So that does suck. But yeah, I don't. That's not the cause of the war.
Native tribes on the For decades, the British Empire had been empowering native tribes on the US frontier to resist American expansion. Indeed, most of the muskets used by Tecumseh's warriors were British manufactured. For the Warhawks in Washington, this provided the excuse needed to pursue American territorial expansion, first by annexing British Canada, then by expanding deeper into the lands of the native tribes on their western frontier. One of the main obstacles preventing American expansionism was still alive and well. Tecumseh had never stopped preparing for war. He had no love for the British, but realized it was only through their manpower and resources that the reconquest of native lands annexed by America and the establishment of an independent pan-tribal native state was possible. To this end, he mobilized his warriors for battle. It was the general
Yeah, it's like he didn't like Tecumseh didn't like either one of them, but siding with the British obviously gave him, I guess, a better chance of keeping his land if they're victorious. So obviously it doesn't really work out. And I guess not the way he wanted it to.
Consensus that if the United States launched an invasion into Canada, the territory would fall quickly. The ongoing war with Napoleon kept the majority of Britain fall. He mobilized his warriors for battle. It was the general consensus that if the United States launched an invasion into Canada, the territory would fall quickly. The ongoing war with Napoleon kept the majority of Britain's armies in Europe, and the local Canadian colonials were unlikely to be willing to fight against a far superior foe. On July 12, 1812, the United States began their invasion when Brigadier General William Hull marched across into Old Sandwich Town in present-day Ontario, occupying it without a fight. He offered peace to the locals should they become Americans, but to those who fought alongside the British or their native allies, he had a much darker promise. The first stroke of the tomahawk, the first attempt with the scalping knife, will be the signal for one indiscriminate scene of desolation. No white man found fighting by the side of an Indian will be taken prisoner. Instant destruction will be his lot. Wow. However, Hull proved to be an ineffective general. The main British garrison in the region was isolated in nearby Fort Malden, but Hull refused to strike, instead holding position in Sandwich Town while obsessing over his supply lines across the Detroit River. On July 17th, 700 native warriors of the Great Lakes nations arrived at Fort St. Joseph on the shores of the Huron to join the British cause. The local British commander had only 50 redcoats under his charge, but empowered by his new allies, he swooped down into Michigan and besieged nearby Fort Mackinac. Unaware that the war had been declared, the American garrison surrendered without a fight.
Yeah.
As Tecumseh's warriors took arms, the great chieftain himself was heading north to join the fray. At Brownstown Creek, he fell fiercely upon
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of blunders in this war. Yeah.
To join the fray. At Brownstown Creek, he fell fiercely upon a supply convoy of 200 US soldiers, scattering them with only 25 warriors at his side. Following this string of humiliating defeats, Hull's nerve broke, and on August 7th, he retreated back into American territory to garrison in Fort Detroit, having accomplished little to nothing. Back in Washington, Thomas Jefferson famously asserted that the acquisition of Canada this year will be a mere matter of marching, but this was no longer the reality. Tecumseh and his natives had delivered the British a fighting chance, and with that, the inspiration for the local Canadians to resist the conquest. But in truth, the war had just begun. There was much to do before Tecumseh's dream could be realized. It was at this point that the Shawnee chieftain's greatest ally enters the story. Major General Isaac Brock was a career soldier and a loyal British subject. In 1802, he was appointed a station in Lower Canada, where he eventually became head of the colonial army. Modern Canadians consider him a national hero, but in truth he resented his outpost. In comparison with the Napoleonic War, Canada was a sleepy and irrelevant sideshow.
Yeah. Be in Europe.
Nevertheless, Brock did his duty well. He reformed the provincial militia and bolstered the defences of forts on the American border. A few months before the war's outbreak, Brock was offered a posting in Europe. Despite his personal desires, he refused, believing he now had a duty to defend Canada against the invasion he knew was soon to come. On the night of August 13, 1812, Brock arrived at Fort Malden aboard a flotilla of ships by way of Lake Erie. Tecumseh was there waiting for him, and the two men were eager to see one another. Both had heard of the other's deeds, and both knew that they needed each other. Brock could not defend Canada without Tecumseh's aid, nor could Tecumseh retake his people's lands without British support. The two leaders soon met face to face and quickly developed a mutual respect. They agreed that only through a quick and decisive offensive could they hope to win this war. To that end, they resolved to attack Fort Detroit, the place where the bulk of
I think that's cool though, how they, the mutual respect, and they both needed each other to make this happen, and there was no I'm better than you kind of thing, just working together, and that's cool to see.
American forces in the northwest were stationed. It was risky, since the Allies knew they would be outnumbered 2-1. Most of Brock's officers were against it, yet the Major General would not relent. Tecumseh was impressed by his new partner's resolve, famously saying, "This is a man. A more sagacious and a more gallant warrior does not, I believe, exist." On the morning of the 15th of August, an allied force of Canadian militias, redcoats and natives made camp in Sandwich Town, opposite the river to the American-held Fort Detroit. Major General Brock commanded a force about 700 strong, while Tecumseh and his warriors numbered around 600. Meanwhile, General Hull had 2,500 men garrisoned inside his well-fortified walls, double the number of his opponent. Brock wrote a letter to his American adversary, demanding his immediate surrender, saying, "It is far from my inclination to join in a war of extermination, but you must be aware that the numerous body of Indians who have attached themselves to my troops will be beyond my control the moment the contest commences." In truth, Tecumseh was no butcher, and in fact abhorred unnecessary killing, but through captured intelligence, he and Brock both knew that General Hull was terrified of native warriors.
It's true. They're probably end up going into this. It's just, I guess the horror stories of the native warriors. They didn't want to get captured, so it definitely played a big psychological advantage. For the Canadians and natives, British, whatever, the Allies. In this war, because you'd be able to probably hear them, with their war cries and stuff like that, and it would definitely, mess with the minds of the Americans, because it's not like they had much, the internet to know exactly what they were up against. They just heard the horror stories, and yeah.
And in fact abhorred unnecessary killing. But through captured intelligence, he and Brock both knew that General Hull was terrified of native warriors, and that the fear of a savage massacre may be enough to break him. Yet still, no surrender came. The following night, Brock began to ferry his troops across the river. The British opened fire with their 3 heavy cannons and 2 mortars to cover the crossing. Hull ordered his 24-pounders to return fire. Neither side managed to inflict much damage upon the other, but on the morning of the 16th, a cannonball struck the fort's mess hall and killed 2 Americans. Upon crossing the river, Brock organized his troops in...
Yeah, for those new to this war, you're not going to see these big numbers like the previous wars have done. I mean, I forget I totally forget the numbers, but maybe a couple thousand people die in this battle. It's somewhere around die in this war. It's not like this huge number, that you're expecting. So, that's why only a couple of people. That's not many people, right? But in a war where only like a couple thousand, few thousand people die, if that, then yeah.
Into two rows a mile out from the fortress walls, boldly placing himself at the front of the line. An officer pleaded that he not expose himself so plainly, to which he replied, "Many here follow me from a feeling of personal regard. I will not ask them to go where I will not lead them." When news arrived that a force of 400 Ohio militiamen were arriving from his rear, Brock doubled down and marched his troops to the far side of the fort, opposite to the river. Meanwhile, Tecumseh and his warriors had quietly made the river crossing 5 miles south, filtering his men into a forest within view of the fort. Ingeniously, he paraded his men in circles, repeatedly having them pass through a gap in the tree line within view of the Americans, delivering ferocious war cries all the while. This created the illusion that there were far more natives at Detroit's gates than there actually were, and made the weight of an Indian massacre all the more real. By now, General Hull had been psychologically broken, with contemporary reports claiming he sat in a muted daze, saliva and tobacco dripping limply from his chin. Within his fort there were women and children, including his very own daughter and grandchild. The man had never had the will of a soldier, and the mind games of Brock and Tecumseh had broken him. After only a few hours of siege, the gates opened, and Hull's own son rode out, bearing a white flag. Fort Detroit had surrendered. It was a stunning defeat for the Americans. The largest garrison in the northern United States had surrendered without a fight. 2,493 soldiers were taken captive by a force barely half their number. Tecumseh had done his part and delivered the British a great victory. Now
I just think that's so amazing. Like you say, you're half the number, but they use the intimidation factor of the natives and just the smarts of just bringing your army around, sort of making it look like you have more numbers than you have. And that, I think that's just that's just cool right there. That siege, man.
it was time for his imperial allies to help him push deeper into American territory and help him establish a homeland for his people. Unfortunately for him, this would never come to pass. The United States was determined to avenge their humiliation at Detroit, and thus launched an offensive upon Queenston Heights, managing to capture the town. This provoked Brock to rally a force of militiamen from nearby York and some native Mohawk allies to once more drive the Americans from Canadian soil. It was in this engagement where the Major General met his end. He charged up the heights with his men, wearing a silk sash given to him by Tecumseh. This made him a conspicuous target, and as he ran up the hill, he was shot fatally through the chest. 300 Mohawk warriors jumped into the fray, holding off a much larger American army until British reinforcements arrived. Queenston was retaken, and nearly 1,000 Americans were captured or killed. Despite this, with Brock dead, the native Confederacy had now lost its only reliable ally. Meanwhile, an old foe of Tecumseh had come to assume command of the American forces in the northwest, none other than William Henry Harrison, the conqueror of Prophetstown.
It always makes me wonder when big leaders go down, how much that changes how things could have been a lot different if they were still alive, because the respect between the two, maybe that could have made things a little different, for Tecumseh's people later on. I don't know.
None other than William Henry Harrison, the conqueror of Prophetstown. Unlike his predecessor Hull, Harrison was a natural leader and a decisive soldier. His first act was to construct a bastion along the Maumee River, which he called Fort Meigs. From there he planned to strike upwards and retake Detroit. Meanwhile, the Governor-General of Canada had promoted an officer by the name of Henry Proctor to lead the British Army due to Isaac Brock's untimely death. Procter and Tecumseh went on the southwards offensive. In January of 1813, the native British forces encountered an expeditionary platoon of mounted Kentucky riflemen sallying north from Fort Meigs. They clashed on a battlefield outside the borough of Frenchtown. For once, the Americans were outnumbered and suffered a resounding defeat. Nearly 500 Kentuckians were killed in the fighting, the highest American casualty count of any battle in the war, and yet another 500 were captured. The American prisoners were put on a forced march back to Fort Malden for detainment. Native warriors began taking liberties with their captives, robbing and killing the injured, and cutting down any who would not keep pace with the slog. Tecumseh himself had left before the battle's end, and was not present to see the massacre. He abhorred needless death, so when he caught wind of the prisoner's fate, he was outraged. Confronting Procter, he demanded to know why the British general would allow such a thing, to which Procter snidely replied that Tecumseh's natives were impossible to control. At this, the chieftain replied temperously, "Begone! You are unfit to command. Go and put on petticoats." From there,
see, there's just a big contrast between the two British leaders, the one they lost and the new one. Like, one seeing him as, a good ally and, go along well and playing. The other one's just like, man, you're just someone I kind of have to deal with, and, whatever problems you have, man, you deal with them kind of way, and they're allies now. I mean, you can't stop now, so they have to make do with each other pretty much, right? Because they both still need each other. So.
You are unfit to command. Go and put on petticoats. From there, cracks continued to form in Tecumseh's tenuous alliance with the British. With Brock, the chieftain had built a strong rapport, but he had no such respect for Procter, who refused to fight the war on the natives' terms, as Brock had. Meanwhile, the Americans would remember the massacre at Frenchtown, their slain prisoners would become martyrs, and the event became a rallying cry for the rest of the war.
Exactly. That's why you want to treat your prisoners great, because when roles get reversed down the line, they're not going to go so easy on you when you get captured. I mean, they're going to treat you just like they got treated. So, you always got to treat, at least treat your enemies with respect, and, hopefully you get treated with respect, back, if that time comes. But yeah.
Sure enough, the tides began to turn. In the spring of 1813, Tecumseh convinced a begrudging Procter into launching a joint assault upon Fort Meigs. Twice a force of 1,200 natives and 900 British soldiers laid siege to the fort, but twice Harrison managed to repel them, despite suffering heavy casualties. As more Americans fell into British captivity during these battles, Tecumseh continued to prevent massacres as much as he could. It is because of this.
I mean, it's like, Tecumseh, because, I guess like his brother or whatnot, or the other relative, they're like, there's such a big hatred, that they just wanted to like slaughter them all, just, I guess, the revenge factor from, their people getting kind of, slaughtered. So, I mean, it's got to stop somewhere, right? And, it's like, try to have some humanity, because, Tecumseh kind of realizes this, and he's just trying to stop his people from doing that. He's smart. He knows that it could come back to haunt him, and it's just the right thing to do. They surrender. Why are you going to slaughter them?
Is that many Americans to this day regard him with the respect befitting a noble foe. The failing relationship between Tecumseh and his allies was further exacerbated when the United States won a decisive naval engagement in September of 1813. The Battle of Put-in Bay put the entirety of Lake Erie in American hands and cut off British supply lines, forcing them to abandon Fort Malden and Fort Detroit, thereby erasing all the victories won by Tecumseh and Brock a year earlier. With winter looming, General Procter retreated eastward, banking on the fact that Harrison would not pursue him through the...
There's more details, to the whole Lake Erie thing, and like storms and whatnot, but obviously this has nothing to do with Tecumseh, so they're kind of going to, blow over it.
Procter retreated eastward, banking on the fact that Harrison would not pursue him through the winter snows. This enraged Tecumseh, for the Shawnee chieftain still wanted to go on the offensive. He felt betrayed. After all, he had delivered the British several victories in their war, only to receive no aid in return for it. As it turned out, Procter's gamble was incorrect. Harrison was all too willing to risk a winter campaign to press his advantage. After retaking Fort Detroit, the American general marched eastwards to pursue the British forces. Still, Procter continued to withdraw, much to the disgust of Tecumseh, who now realized that his unreliable ally could not be further removed from the gallantry and bravery of Brock. Reluctantly, the Shawnee took his warriors and joined the British retreat. But soon he had had enough. Realizing there was no end to Procter's timidity, Tecumseh stood before the general and put his foot in the earth, issuing him an ultimatum. The British would withdraw no further, or the alliance between them and his native confederacy was over. In declaring this, Tecumseh had said choice words that would go down in history. "Our lives are in the hands of the Great Spirit. We are determined to defend our lands, and if it be his will, we wish to leave our bones upon them." With his hand being forced, Procter agreed to face Harrison's army. He chose to make his stand on the banks of the Canadian River Thames near Moraviantown, a village of Christian Delawares. Procter's 900 men lined themselves in rows perpendicular to the river. Exhausted and starving from their forced march, the Redcoats were in no state to fight. Tecumseh stationed his warriors in a black ash swamp to the British right, where they would have ample cover and could flank the approaching American army. The emboldened Grand Chieftain personally shook the hand of each British officer before rejoining his men. Before long, the Americans were in sight.
I'm at our
Harrison's force was imposing, nearly 4,000 strong. They more than doubled the numbers of the British and natives combined. Procter had made no attempt to build earthworks to fortify his position, and so the plains between him and the Americans remained entirely uncontested. Harrison knew that the best way to break his enemy was to move fast and strike hard, much like he had done at Prophetstown 2 years earlier. The American general kept the bulk of his militia and infantry in reserve, and organized a center column of mounted Kentucky riflemen to barrel down towards the British line. Tecumseh and his warriors opened fire from the swamp, but were unable to stop the cavalry from thundering into their redcoat allies.
Damn.
This devastating charge broke the British morale. Gripped by panic, they broke formation and scattered, offering only a token resistance through disorganized and scattered gunfire. General Procter fled the field with 250 of his men, while the remaining 600 British soldiers were either captured or cut down. When Tecumseh was young, he had taken an oath to never again flee in the face of battle. Even now, with his allies abandoning him and outnumbered 8-1 by his enemy, he would uphold that oath. Entrenched deep in the swamps, the natives fought on without British aid. Harrison ordered his Kentucky cavalrymen to break their lines, but their initial charge was cut down by a fusillade of native gunfire. From there, the battle devolved into a drawn-out shootout, with both sides trading fire amidst the cover of the swampy thicket. It is here, in a battlefield of smoky air and muddy mire, that the story of Tecumseh ends. As the chaotic shootout continued, an American soldier managed to train his sights on the proud Shawnee chieftain and shoot him through the chest. Tecumseh was killed immediately upon the impact. It didn't take long for news of Tecumseh's death to spread among the native warriors. Deeply demoralized by this, and
It doesn't surprise me because I remember hearing. I was never sure what the name was, but I definitely remember the native like leader or whatnot getting killed. I wasn't sure if it was Tecumseh, but obviously it was. So this doesn't surprise me. And the fact that it just stinks he doesn't really get to see, or get his people together to see, what would have happened. If Rock was still alive, this probably doesn't go down like this, and things are probably a lot different. So just a little, one of the many billion things in history where things were done a different way. Things could turn out different. So, but anyways, yeah.
Feared by the rest of Harrison's army descending upon them, they fled the battlefield and scattered. The Battle of the Thames was a decisive victory for the Americans and spelled the end of the Great Native Coalition. Tecumseh had been the glue that bound them together. No other warrior among them had as much respect from so many diverse tribes. After the engagement at Moravian Town, many individual chieftains surrendered to Governor Harrison and returned to their homes, beholden to the will of the United States. There would be no more United Native Front, and no more attempts to form a united indigenous nation on North American soil. The confederacy that Tecumseh had spent so many years building in life inevitably dissolved with his death. The War of 1812 would rage on for another 2 years after Tecumseh's passing, but native warriors no longer played a major role. Both British and American armies scored later victories, with the British sacking the capital of Washington and the Americans winning an iconic engagement at New Orleans. The war ended in stalemate. The British had successfully defended their territory, while the Americans had asserted their sovereignty. Canada would not be annexed, and America would no longer have their economic and territorial interests imposed upon. In the end, the only true losers of the War of 1812 were the indigenous tribes of the continent. During peace talks, the British had originally negotiated to establish a native nation, albeit only to create a buffer state to block further American expansion. Naturally, the Americans outright denied this proposal. Realizing they did not have the leverage to enforce such a thing, the British quickly abandoned the notion. When the Treaty of Ghent was signed in December of 1814, no provisions existed to stem the tide of American westward expansion, and expand they did. Without a strong leader like Tecumseh to bind them, the indigenous peoples of the American continent were largely helpless to combat the flood of settlers that came to take their lands. The Red Stick Muskogees, who had declared for Tecumseh, fought on for a time, engaging the Americans in the Deep South, but they too were eventually defeated by future President Andrew Jackson in a massacre at Horseshoe Bend. In the end, the story of Tecumseh is a tragic tale. A man of remarkable charisma, integrity, bravery and strength, who spent his whole life fighting for independence and unity, only to have it all taken away upon his death. Even his greatest foe in William Henry Harrison had remarked that this brave warrior had the makings of an emperor, and it is easy to wonder what great things he could have done if only he had lived a little longer. True. Nevertheless, Tecumseh's memory is alive and well today. To the Americans, he was a noble opponent. To Canadians, the savior of their nation. But to the indigenous peoples of North America, he is and always will be, above all things, an icon of resistance. We always have more stories to tell, so make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have pressed.
Yeah, I forgot his name, but I guess I knew, leader in the natives definitely played a big part in, this war. And down the line, I'll end up doing the War of 1812, and it's full. This is just kind of the natives play in it, and it kind of stops. Obviously, before now, there's a lot more that goes on in this war, and a lot more to come. But this is just on the natives. But yeah, it's like, wow, this is so unfortunate and everything. And there it is, guys. I hope you liked this video. Please hit that like and subscribe button. I'd really appreciate it. And there you have it, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and we'll get on to future videos. I don't know what's coming next, but there you have it, guys. Let me know your thoughts below about this war and all that. I just said that. But anyways, guys, you guys have a great day, a great night, and all that fun stuff. And I am out of here. Woo!